American Civil War. A nation divided brother against brother, a bloody struggle for freedom and unity. It's a story we think we know. A righteous North battling to free the enslaved against a South determined to preserve its way of life. But this narrative, while compelling, often obscures the more complicated truths that lie beneath the surface. To truly understand its legacy, we must unravel the simplified narrative and confront the darker, often uncomfortable realities that shaped this pivotal chapter in American history. The institution of slavery, with its undeniable barbarity, is often cited as the sole catalyst for the Civil War. And while the moral outrage over slavery was a powerful motivating factor, particularly in the North, it was not the only force at play. The conflict was also fueled by a complex interplay of economic interests that transcended geographical borders. In the South, the plantation economy, built on the backs of enslaved people, was deeply entrenched. Cotton, the South's white gold, fueled the factories of the North and the economies of Europe. The wealth generated by slave labor was vast, benefiting not only Southern planters but also Northern bankers, merchants, and industrialists. The North, while espousing anti-slavery sentiments, also benefited from the cheap labor and raw materials provided by the South. Even President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, often hailed as a beacon of moral clarity, was, in part, a strategic maneuver. Issued in 1863, it declared the freedom of slaves in Confederate territories, but not in the border states that remained loyal to the Union. The Emancipation Proclamation was a turning point in the war, but it was also a stark reminder that even the most righteous of causes are often intertwined with political and economic calculations. The Civil War, often portrayed as a conflict between Americans, also drew into its vortex thousands of immigrants who had recently arrived on American shores. Lured by the promise of a new life and escaping poverty and famine in their homelands, these immigrants found themselves caught in the crosshairs of a war that was not their own. The Irish, in particular, faced a complex and often tragic predicament. Arriving in America in droves during the potato famine, they were met with prejudice and discrimination, relegated to the lowest rungs of society. Competing with free black Americans for low-wage jobs, they often found themselves pitted against one another in a struggle for survival. When the Civil War erupted, many Irish immigrants, eager to prove their loyalty to their adopted country and escape the squalor of urban slums, enlisted in the Union Army. However, the Union's decision to implement a draft in 1863 ignited simmering tensions and exposed the deep divisions within Northern society. The draft law, which allowed wealthy draftees to pay for substitutes, was seen as unfairly targeting the poor, particularly Irish immigrants who could ill afford the $300 commutation fee. In July 1863, New York City erupted in violence. The draft riots, fueled by a potent mix of racial resentment, economic anxiety, and anti-government sentiment, raged for 3 days. The riots, brutally suppressed by federal troops, left over 100 people dead and exposed the dark underbelly of a nation grappling with issues of class, race, and citizenship. The narrative of the Civil War as a triumph of freedom over slavery, while compelling, often obscures the harsh realities faced by African Americans both during and after the conflict. While the Emancipation Proclamation declared the freedom of slaves in Confederate territories, it did not guarantee their equality or safety. Black soldiers who fought bravely for the Union Army faced discrimination within its ranks, often relegated to segregated units and denied equal pay and opportunities for advancement. In the North, where slavery had been abolished, African Americans continued to encounter widespread racism and prejudice. They were denied basic civil rights, relegated to segregated neighborhoods and schools, and subjected to violence and intimidation. The end of the war brought about the hope of Reconstruction, a period of promise and possibility for Black Americans. But this era, intended to rebuild the South and integrate formerly enslaved people into society, was tragically short-lived and ultimately unsuccessful. Southern resistance to Reconstruction was fierce. White Southerners, resentful of federal intervention and determined to maintain their racial hierarchy, formed paramilitary groups like the Ku Klux Klan, which terrorized black communities. The federal government, its resolve weakened by political infighting and waning public support for Reconstruction, gradually withdrew its troops from the South. By the 1870s, Reconstruction was effectively over, leaving behind a legacy of broken promises and unfulfilled dreams. Chapter 4. The Rise of the Machine. Industrialization and its discontents. The Civil War, a watershed moment in American history, not only reshaped the nation's political and social landscape, but also ignited an industrial revolution that would transform the United States into a global power. But this transformation came at a cost, as the war's insatiable appetite for weapons, supplies, and infrastructure fueled corruption, profiteering, and the concentration of wealth in the hands of a few. As the conflict raged, the North, with its superior industrial capacity, mobilized its factories to meet the demands of war. New industries sprang up, old ones expanded, and the roar of machinery replaced the rhythms of rural life. The war effort created unprecedented demand, and with it, opportunities for both innovation and exploitation. While some entrepreneurs answered the call to patriotism, others saw a chance to enrich themselves at the expense of a nation at war. This era of wartime profiteering, while enriching a select few, laid the groundwork for the Gilded Age, a period of rampant corruption, income inequality, and unchecked corporate power. The rise of industrial capitalism, fueled by the demands of war, brought about both progress and peril, creating a nation of unprecedented wealth and opportunity, but also one riven by inequality and social unrest. Chapter 5. Reconstruction's fade out, the lost promise of equality. As the smoke cleared from the battlefields of the Civil War, a new struggle began. The fight to rebuild a shattered nation and secure the rights of newly emancipated African Americans. Reconstruction was a period of immense promise and tragic failure, where ideals of equality clashed with racial prejudice. The South, devastated by war, found itself occupied by federal troops enforcing Reconstruction policies. These policies faced fierce resistance from white Southerners determined to maintain their way of life. Despite challenges, Reconstruction brought significant progress. Black Americans participated in politics, electing representatives to state and federal government. However, these gains were fragile under threat from white Southerners who resorted to violence and intimidation. The Ku Klux Klan terrorized black communities, targeting those who exercised their newfound rights. As federal troops withdrew, Reconstruction efforts crumbled, leaving black Americans vulnerable to white supremacy. Chapter 6. A Nation Still Expanding, the Forgotten Cost of Manifest Destiny. While the Civil War raged across the eastern and southern states, another conflict, less heralded but no less consequential, unfolded on the western frontier. This was the ongoing struggle between the United States government and Native American tribes, a conflict fueled by the relentless push for westward expansion and the insatiable hunger for land and resources. The Civil War, while diverting resources and attention from the West, did little to slow the momentum of manifest destiny, the belief that the United States was destined to span the continent from coast to coast. In fact, the war in some ways exacerbated the situation, as the federal government, eager to secure its borders and exploit the West's resources, intensified its efforts to subdue Native American resistance. Treaties were broken, lands seized, and Native American communities displaced and forced onto reservations. The discovery of gold and silver in Western territories further fueled the influx of settlers, miners, and speculators, putting further pressure on Native American lands and ways of life. The Civil War also saw the creation of the United States Colored Troops, comprised of black soldiers who fought bravely for the Union cause. After the war, some of these soldiers were deployed westward, where they played a complex and often contradictory role in the ongoing conflict with Native Americans. The legacy of this expansion, rooted in conquest and displacement, continues to cast a long shadow on the relationship between the United States government and Native American tribes today. Chapter 7. The Unfinished Fight: Legacies of a Divided Nation. The American Civil War, a conflict that tore a nation asunder, continues to captivate and challenge us. It is a story of heroism and sacrifice, of principled stands and bitter divisions. But it is also a story that defies easy categorization, a tapestry woven from threads of both darkness and light. Only by grappling with the full complexity of this pivotal chapter in American history can we hope to learn from its mistakes, to build a more just and equitable society, and to fulfill the promise of a nation founded on the ideals of liberty and equality for all.